In August 1974, an enormous American ship sat over an empty patch of the Pacific, apparently engaged in an experimental mining operation. Nearby Soviet vessels watched it. They could see the derrick, the cranes, the strange machinery, and the activity on deck. What they could not see was the real operation happening beneath the Hughes Glomar Explorer. More than 3 miles below the ship, a massive capture vehicle was connected to it by a column of heavy steel pipe stretching almost to the ocean floor. Wrapped inside that machine was part of a Soviet ballistic missile submarine that had vanished 6 years earlier. K-129 was no longer resting on the seabed. The Americans had found it, gripped it, and begun lifting it. For years, the entire mission had depended on one question: could a machine built in secret reach a wreck at extreme depth, take hold of it, and raise it without the Soviet Union discovering what was happening? By August, the answer appeared to be yes. Then, during the ascent, most of the intended prize fell away. To understand why the CIA had built a ship, a cover story, and one of the most unusual lifting systems ever put to sea, the story has to return to 1968. K-129 was a Soviet Golf II-class submarine, a diesel-electric boat designed to carry ballistic missiles. It was not nuclear-powered, but it was part of the Soviet Union's strategic nuclear force. On patrol in the Pacific, it carried 3 nuclear-armed ballistic missiles, along with its torpedo armament. In March 1968, K-129 failed to communicate as expected. Then it failed to return. The Soviet Navy launched a major search. Aircraft and ships crossed large areas of the Pacific, trying to find some sign of the submarine or its crew. Later American records described a search involving at least 53 aircraft and 37 ships, but the Soviets did not locate the wreck. All aboard were lost. Modern naval histories commonly give a crew of 98 men. The cause remains unresolved. Over the years, theories have included an internal explosion, a missile accident, a torpedo accident, and collision with another submarine. Some Soviet and Russian officers later argued that the American submarine USS Swordfish had collided with K-129. American accounts have disputed that theory. No public evidence has settled the question. What mattered for the next part of the story was not why K-129 sank. It was that the Soviet Union did not know exactly where it had gone down. The United States had a different set of clues. American acoustic intelligence had detected information associated with the loss and helped narrow the area where the submarine might be found. That still did not mean the wreck had been identified. A sound in the ocean could reduce the search area. It could not show exactly what lay on the bottom. For that, the United States sent a specially modified submarine, USS Halibut. Finding K-129 was itself a deep ocean operation. Halibut was not searching a harbor or a shallow continental shelf. The suspected area covered open Pacific water, and the submarine was a relatively small target on a vast seabed. The photographs mattered because they turned an intelligence estimate into a physical wreck that could be studied. Once analysts could see its condition and position, recovery stopped being a purely theoretical idea. Halibut had been equipped for deep ocean search and intelligence work. In 1968, it searched the suspected area and eventually returned with photographs of K-129 on the seabed. The wreck lay at a depth of roughly 16,000 to 16,500 feet. The exact coordinates have never been publicly released by the United States. The important fact was simpler. The Soviet Union had lost a ballistic missile submarine. The United States knew where it was. At first, photographing the wreck was already an intelligence achievement. But the images created another possibility. A submarine of this kind could contain much more than information visible from the outside. Inside K-129 might still be cryptographic equipment, communications material, navigation systems, fire control equipment, sonar technology, missile components, nuclear weapons technology, and other equipment that American intelligence wanted to study. A 1974 mission proposal listed exactly those kinds of targets. The potential value was enormous. The obstacle was equally obvious. Recovering something from that depth was not simply a matter of sending down a cable and pulling. The CIA did not plan to lift the entire submarine. The recovery concept focused on a section estimated at roughly 132 feet long and about 1,750 tons. It was a damaged submarine that had already survived a catastrophic loss and 6 years underwater. By 1970, planners were considering a heavy lift approach. The basic idea sounded almost simple when reduced to one sentence. Build a machine large enough to surround the target, lower it to K-129, grip the wreck, and raise it to the surface. That sentence concealed several engineering problems. The capture machine had to descend to the seabed while remaining controllable. The surface ship had to stay over it despite wind, waves, and currents. And when the wreck reached the ship, it could not simply be swung over the side where a Soviet aircraft, satellite, or passing vessel might see it. The CIA needed a machine that did not exist. And then it needed a ship built around that machine. The giant capture vehicle developed for the operation became known by the nickname Clementine. It was not a simple hook. It was a massive claw-like structure intended to descend to the seabed, maneuver around the chosen section of K-129, close around it, and support it during the lift. Instead of using one ordinary cable, the system relied on heavy steel pipe assembled in sections. The principle resembled deep ocean drilling in reverse. As Clementine descended, the crew would add lengths of pipe one after another. During the ascent, they would remove those sections one by one. Each section was about 60 feet long. The pipe system also imposed a peculiar rhythm on the entire mission. Clementine could not simply be lowered in one continuous motion and then reeled back like a conventional load. Every new length of pipe extended the connection between ship and capture vehicle, and every recovered length had to be handled again on deck. The operation therefore depended on thousands of individual, repetitive actions being carried out while the ship held position over the same patch of ocean. By the time Clementine reached the bottom, the pipe string would extend for miles beneath the ship. That created another problem. A vessel at the surface is never perfectly still. Even in manageable weather, it rises and falls with the sea, shifts under wind, and responds to current. A capture vehicle resting near the bottom cannot simply follow every movement of a ship thousands of feet above it. So the recovery vessel needed precise station keeping to hold itself over the target. It also needed equipment to reduce the amount of vertical surface motion transmitted into the lifting system. At this depth, those systems were part of what made the operation possible. The ship built for the mission was the Hughes Glomar Explorer. Publicly, it was associated with billionaire Howard Hughes and presented as a revolutionary deep-sea mining vessel. The story was that Hughes was backing a project to collect manganese nodules from the Pacific seabed. As a cover story, it was unusually effective. Hughes was wealthy enough to make an expensive, unconventional deep-sea project seem plausible. He was famously private. And deep ocean mining was new enough that outsiders had little basis for deciding what a real mining ship should look like. That mattered because Glomar Explorer looked unlike an ordinary commercial vessel. It had enormous lifting machinery. It carried systems for handling long strings of pipe. It needed sophisticated station keeping. Most important, it had a huge enclosed opening through the center of the hull, a moon pool or central well through which Clementine could be lowered. That well solved the secrecy problem. If the mission worked, K-129 would not be lifted into open air beside the ship. Clementine would bring the captured wreck directly upward into the enclosed center of Glomar Explorer. The submarine would enter an American ship from below. From outside, there would never need to be a moment when a Soviet submarine was visibly hanging from a crane. The cover story therefore did more than hide the purpose of the ship. Secrecy shaped the physical design of the recovery system itself. Behind the Hughes name, the United States government was the real sponsor. Global Marine was involved in ship operations. Lockheed developed the capture vehicle. Honeywell worked on station keeping and data systems. Years of engineering, construction, testing, and deception all converged on one short operating season in the Pacific. The preferred summer weather window was limited. In 1974, Glomar Explorer sailed for the recovery area. It arrived over K-129 on July 4th. On American Independence Day, a ship publicly described as a mining vessel took position over a lost Soviet ballistic-missile submarine and prepared to begin one of the most secret recovery operations of the Cold War. Then Clementine began going down. 60-foot pipe sections were added one after another. The capture vehicle disappeared beneath the ship, then deeper into the Pacific, while the pipe string grew behind it. Hundreds of feet became thousands. Thousands became miles. Above, Glomar Explorer had to remain positioned over a target no one on deck could see directly. Below, the equipment descended through black water toward a wreck that had already been photographed but never touched by a recovery system of this scale. The scale of Project AZORIAN had become a physical object hanging beneath Glomar Explorer, and then Soviet ships appeared. For years, the CIA had designed the operation around avoiding Soviet attention. Now Soviet vessels were close enough to observe the strange American ship directly. The Americans could not simply stop looking suspicious. Glomar Explorer was already a unique vessel sitting in a remote part of the Pacific, with a massive derrick, heavy machinery, and a deep-sea operation underway. Their main protection was the cover story. The Soviets watched. At one point, according to the declassified CIA history, the Americans were concerned enough about the possibility of a Soviet helicopter attempting to land that crates were positioned across the helicopter deck. Procedures also existed for destroying sensitive material if the ship were boarded. One documented period of Soviet close surveillance lasted 13 days and 16 hours. Yet the mission continued. The remarkable part was that they could watch Glomar Explorer while the real target remained directly below the American ship. The Soviet crews saw a mining vessel. Beneath Glomar Explorer, the CIA was preparing to seize part of K-129. Clementine reached the wreck area. Now came the part no cover story could solve. The capture vehicle had to be positioned around a damaged submarine section on the seabed and close around it strongly enough to support the ascent. This was the point at which years of intelligence analysis and engineering became a single mechanical action. Clementine took hold. On August 1st, the lifting operation began. K-129 moved. For the first time since it had sunk in 1968, part of the submarine left the Pacific floor. The capture system had reached the wreck, taken hold of a section weighing roughly 1,750 tons, and lifted it from the seabed. But lifting off the bottom was not the end of the mission. It was the beginning of the ascent. Even after liftoff, nothing about the ascent was automatic. The wreck had to remain supported while the pipe string shortened, the hydraulic system continued working, and Glomar Explorer stayed within the limits required by the equipment below. The distance still remaining above K-29 was measured not in a single dramatic pull, but in section after section of steel pipe returning to the ship. Glomar Explorer now had to bring Clementine and its load upward while removing the enormous pipe string section by section. The process was slow. Each length had to be handled aboard the ship as the distance between the wreck and the surface gradually decreased. The declassified operational history records about 16,440 feet of pipe being recovered during the ascent. That number gives the depth a physical shape. More than 16,000 feet of steel connection had been assembled between the ship and the claw. Now it had to come back aboard. The recovery was also dealing with mechanical problems. The CIA history records hydraulic leaks, difficult valves, failed pumps, and problems maintaining the required pressure in parts of the system. Still, the submarine was rising. The hardest conceptual question had already been answered. Clementine could lift part of K-129. Then the load changed. During the ascent, a major portion of the submarine section escaped the capture system. Released accounts describe failure or deformation in parts of the capture mechanism, but the full mechanical sequence has never been publicly established. Later explanations often reduce the event to a single broken claw or one specific failed component. The public record does not support that level of certainty. What is certain is the consequence. Most of the intended recovered section fell away. It returned toward the Pacific floor. A machine capable of reaching K-129 and lifting it from the seabed had lost much of its prize during the ascent. There was no practical way to restart the recovery during the same lift. The objective changed immediately. The task was no longer to bring up the section originally selected for recovery. It was to save whatever remained inside Clementine. The crew continued the ascent. More pipe came aboard. The remaining wreck material climbed toward the moon pool. Eventually, Clementine reached Glomar Explorer, and the surviving portion of K-129 was drawn into the enclosed well. Part of a Soviet ballistic-missile submarine had entered an American ship without ever appearing openly above the sea. What happened next is one of the places where the public record becomes less complete, just as the story becomes more interesting. Later accounts have often described the recovered piece as approximately 38 feet of the submarine, although the released CIA history does not confirm that figure. The CIA has publicly acknowledged the larger fact. A portion of K-129 was recovered. The recovered material also presented a radiological problem. Declassified records describe plutonium contamination associated with the wreck material. That contamination alone does not establish that intact nuclear weapons were recovered. Then the recovery stopped being only a question of machinery and intelligence. Inside the material brought aboard were the remains of 6 Soviet submariners. American planners had considered this possibility before the mission. The recovery plan included procedures for respectful treatment if Soviet crew remains were found. The 6 men were given a burial at sea with military honors. Years later, in 1992, CIA Director Robert Gates presented Russian President Boris Yeltsin with a recording of the ceremony. The moment gave Project AZORIAN a different weight. The object the CIA had spent years trying to recover was not only a source of weapons technology or secret equipment, it was also part of a submarine in which men had died. As for the intelligence prize itself, the public record remains incomplete. The mission had been justified partly by the hope of recovering cryptographic equipment, missile technology, weapons information, and other Soviet systems. The CIA has said that the intelligence obtained contributed to American understanding of Soviet strategic capabilities. But it has never publicly disclosed a complete inventory of everything recovered from K-129 or everything learned from it. That gap has encouraged decades of claims about codebooks, cipher machines, nuclear weapons, and missile components. Those claims go beyond what the released record establishes. The most defensible conclusion is also the most intriguing. The CIA recovered part of K-129. It has never told the public everything that was inside it. After the 1974 operation, there was still a powerful reason to go back. Much of the intended target had fallen away during the ascent, and a second recovery mission was considered. But the engineering problem was no longer the only obstacle. The cover was beginning to collapse. In June 1974, before the first operation had even been completed, burglars had stolen documents from a Hughes-related office in Los Angeles. Among the stolen material were documents connecting Hughes with the CIA. Attempts to recover the documents and contain the damage helped create more attention. Journalists began pursuing the story. By early 1975, Project AZORIAN was becoming public. The Los Angeles Times published an early account in February. In March, broadcaster Jack Anderson discussed the operation nationally. The following day, Seymour Hersh published a major report in the New York Times. Once the Soviet Union understood what Glomar Explorer had actually been built to do, the basic condition that had made AZORIAN possible disappeared. The first mission had relied on Moscow seeing an eccentric mining project. A second mission would return to the exact site of K-129 after the cover had been exposed. The Soviets could monitor the area directly. The second recovery was abandoned. Most of K-129 remained at the bottom of the Pacific. Glomar Explorer survived far longer than the operation that created it. It later entered commercial deepwater work and spent years as a drilling vessel. By 2015, the extraordinary ship built around a secret submarine recovery system had been sold for scrapping. Project AZORIAN also left behind something less physical. When journalists and researchers requested information connected with the operation, officials sometimes resisted even confirming that the requested information existed. The formulation became famous. The government would neither confirm nor deny. Over time, that response became known simply as the Glomar response. It was a fitting legacy for a mission designed around concealment. For a time, the concealment worked. The Soviet Union lost K-129 and could not find it. The United States found the wreck, photographed it, built Clementine, built Glomar Explorer, and managed to lift part of the submarine from the seabed while Soviet ships watched nearby. Then most of the intended prize fell away. A smaller portion reached the ship. 6 Soviet sailors came with it. The second attempt never happened. Today, Glomar Explorer is gone. Most of K-129 still lies in the Pacific, at a location the United States has never officially published. And more than half a century after Clementine carried part of the submarine into the hidden well of an American ship, the full answer to the simplest remaining question, is still not public. The CIA has acknowledged that it recovered part of K-129. It still has not said exactly everything that came up with it,